Hello and welcome to another episode of Archives and Anchovies. I'm your host, James Coulon, and today we have quite an interesting story. So, probably 4 times a year, I will listen to the Broadway production of Hamilton on one of my drives to and from California. Sometimes it's if we're going camping. It's a pretty long musical. If you haven't listened to it, I absolutely recommend it, especially if you haven't seen it. I would highly recommend that you go see it. And so I was listening to it on one of our recent trips to California and was thinking, what actually happened after the famous duel between Hamilton and Burr? What happened with the country? And what happened to Aaron Burr? So I started doing some research, and it is a very interesting part of history. So that's what we're going to talk about today. I am going to set up what happened and some of the reasons why the duel happened prior to, but want to talk a little bit about what the country went through and kind of the crisis that happened when a sitting vice president basically commits murder. Picture this. Picture the Hudson River on a summer morning. It's July 11th, 1804. The sun's just coming up over the water. 2 boats, they're pushing off from the Manhattan shore. And one of the boats sits Alexander Hamilton. He's about 50 years old, depending on when he was born, which has some debate if you listen to one of my other podcasts. He's one of America's founding fathers. He's the brilliant mind behind the nation's financial system, and he's wearing dark clothes. His face looks really grim. In the other boat that pushed off, Aaron Burr. He's about 48 years old, currently serving as the sitting vice president of the United States. He's equally somber, equally determined, though. They're crossing to Weehawken, New Jersey, to a narrow ledge of rock right above the river where duels have been fought for years. It's illegal in New York, so they cross the state line into New Jersey, where in the show they say everything is legal in New Jersey. Both men, they both know how this works. They've been seconds at duels before. The seconds are the trusted friends who arrange the details. They load the pistols, they enforce the rules, and they try to compromise before the duel ends. But this time, they're not watching. Hamilton and Burr are both fighting. And one of them will be dead very soon. And what happens next after that creates a constitutional crisis that America, it's never faced before in its fledgling nation. This is the story of how America's vice president killed a founding father and what the country did about it. So to understand why these 2 men ended up on that dueling ground in the first place, you have to go back decades. It's a really long time. It's a really long story of their history. Hamilton and Burr, they'd known each other since the Revolutionary War. They were both soldiers. They were both really young officers. They were both ambitious. They were both very brilliant. After the war, they both became lawyers in New York City, so they were obviously quite brilliant men. They were even colleagues, even friends on a professional sense. They worked on cases together. They attended the same social functions. But, as happens many times, politically, they couldn't have been more different. Hamilton, he was one of the founders of the Federalist Party. He believed that America needed a strong central government to survive. He pushed for a national bank, federal assumption of state debts, and he also pushed for close economic ties with Britain. Burr, on the other hand, he aligned himself with the Democratic Republicans, the party of Thomas Jefferson and James Madison. This party, well, they believed that power should rest with the states, not the federal government. And throughout the 1790s, Hamilton and Burr, they clashed repeatedly. In the press, in the courtroom while they were lawyers, and, of course, in political circles. But the real breaking point came in 1800. At this time, presidential elections worked very differently. There were no running mates, no separate votes for president and vice president like we currently do today in the United States. And so here's how it worked. Each presidential elector got to cast 2 votes for president. Whoever got the most votes became president. And whoever came in second, that person then ended up winning the vice presidency. So here we are in 1800. The Democratic Republicans ran 2 candidates, Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr. Both were running for president. The plan was pretty simple. Their electors would vote for both Jefferson and Burr, but slightly more would vote for Jefferson. That way, Jefferson would become president and Burr would become vice president. But this type of coordination in that party that year failed. Every Democratic Republican elector voted for both men. So Jefferson and Burr, they ended up in a tie, 73 electoral votes each. And under the Constitution, a tied election at that point then went to the House of Representatives. And each state where there was representatives got one vote. And the House was controlled by, guess what? Hamilton's Federalists. So Hamilton faced an impossible choice. He absolutely despised Thomas Jefferson. They had been enemies for years. Not only political enemies, but they really just didn't like each other. And Jefferson had accused Hamilton of being a monarchist because he wanted some sort of British influence. Hamilton had accused Jefferson of being a dangerous radical at the time. But Hamilton, he despised Burr even more. Hamilton called Burr bankrupt beyond redemption. He said Burr had no principles, no ideology, that he'd say or do anything in order to gain power. He wrote letter after letter, and Hamilton was a master at the quill. He wrote it to the House members urging them to vote for Jefferson instead of Burr. After 36 ballots, so think about that, they voted 37 times. 36 of them, they were ties. And Hamilton was lobbying furiously behind the scenes. Jefferson finally won and became president. Burr, he became vice president, but he'd been running for president himself. And Hamilton had blocked his path to the presidency. Burr never forgave Hamilton for that. And for 4 years, Burr served as Jefferson's VP. But Jefferson froze him out completely. He didn't consult with him. He didn't invite him to meetings. He basically treated him like he didn't exist. And so, by 1804, it was clear Jefferson would dump Burr from the ticket. So Burr decided to run for governor of New York instead. Hamilton, well, he campaigned against him as well in that aspect, and he campaigned against him hard. He called him unfit for office. Burr, he lost that badly as well. And that's when Burr decided he'd had enough of Alexander Hamilton. By June 1804, a letter appeared in the Albany Register, a New York newspaper. The letter described a dinner party where Hamilton had spoken about Burr. According to the writer, anyway, Hamilton had expressed a still more despicable opinion of Burr than what was already public and what people already knew. The letter didn't say what that opinion was exactly, but it was enough. So on June 18th, Burr sent Hamilton a letter. It was very formal, it was very icy, and it was very precise. He demanded Hamilton explain his comments or disavow them. Hamilton, of course, wrote back. His response was classic Hamilton, legalistic, evasive, refusing to apologize. He said he couldn't remember what he'd said, that the word despicable was too vague, that Burr was asking him to account for 15 years of political opposition, which was not something that he was going to do. So more letters went back and forth, each one colder than the last. And then finally, on June 27th, Burr issued a formal challenge. He asked Hamilton to meet him on the field of honor, code for a duel. Hamilton, he could have refused. Duels, they were illegal. He had a wife. At this point, he had 7 children, and he had already lost his eldest son, Philip, in a duel 3 years earlier. And Philip was killed at the exact same spot in Weehawken. But refusing this would ruin his reputation, and Alexander Hamilton was a lot about his reputation. In the honor of culture of the time, declining a duel meant you were a coward, and his word would have been worthless. So Hamilton accepted. For the next 2 weeks, both men made arrangements. They chose their seconds, they selected weapons, they agreed on a location and on a time. Hamilton wrote letters to his family. In one, he explained why he felt compelled to accept. In another, he claimed he planned to throw away his shot to fire in the air as a gesture of goodwill. Whether he meant that or not, we'll never know. And now we get to the duel. July 11th, 1804, 7 in the morning. Hamilton and Burr, they arrived at Weehawken separately. The dueling ground, it was this narrow ledge cut into cliffs right above the Hudson River. maybe 10-yard wide, 20 yards long. Hamilton's second was Nathaniel Pendleton. Burr's was William Van Ness. Both of these men were lawyers, and they both knew what they were doing. The seconds cleared the ground, and they loaded the pistols, smooth bore flintlocks, prone to misfiring. Hamilton and Burr took their position, 10 paces apart, standing sideways to make themselves smaller targets. Pendleton read the rules. When he gave the command, both men could fire. The woods were quiet. Just the sound of the river below and birds in the trees. It was peaceful. Then Pendleton gave the command. Hamilton raised his pistol and fired. His shot went high, hitting a tree branch 12 feet up, about 4 feet above Burr's head. Later, Hamilton's second would claim it was intentional, that Hamilton had always planned to throw away his shot, but some witnesses disagreed. Some said Hamilton aimed. Some said he jerked at the last second. What we know for certain is this: Hamilton did fire first. Burr stood perfectly still. He raised his pistol, he took careful aim, and he fired. The bullet hit Hamilton just above his right hip. It tore through his liver and his stomach. It ricocheted off his rib and lodged into his spine near his left shoulder. Hamilton, he spun, collapsed. His pistol fell. Burr took a step forward. Witnesses said he looked shocked, even regretful, but Van Ness grabbed him and pulled him toward the boats. If authorities arrived, they'd both be arrested. Burr and Van Ness rowed back across the Hudson. They left before Hamilton was even carried to the boat. Hamilton's second in command and doctor rowed him back to Manhattan. They carried him to a friend's house on Jane Street. Doctors examined him. The bullet had shattered his spine. Internal bleeding, no chance of survival. And Hamilton knew it. He told them, "This is a mortal wound." His wife Eliza rushed to his side. His children came as well. Friends gathered, and for 31 hours, Hamilton drifted in and out of consciousness. He died at roughly 2 p.m. on July 12, 1804. The city, it exploded in grief and rage. Hamilton's funeral was massive. Thousands lined the streets. Shops closed, bells tolled. Gouverneur Morris gave the eulogy, calling Hamilton the greatest man America had ever produced. Meanwhile, Aaron Burr, he fled. Murder charges were filed in both New York and in New Jersey for Burr. Wanted posters went up, and then America faced a question it had never encountered before. What do you do with the vice president when he commits a murder? The Constitution, it didn't have an answer. There was no precedent, no mechanism for removing a vice president except impeachment. And Congress at this point in time that year was not in session yet. President Jefferson stayed silent. He didn't defend Burr, but he didn't condemn him either. Publicly, he basically said nothing. Behind the scenes, Jefferson was furious, but he was also politically shrewd. If he called for Burr's removal, it would look very partisan. If he defended Burr, it would look like he condoned murder. He was stuck in a very tough place. So Jefferson, he just did nothing. And Burr remained vice president. For months, Burr hid in South Carolina and Georgia. The murder charges were still active. If he set foot in New York or New Jersey, he'd be arrested. But federal jurisdiction was murky. Could state authorities arrest a sitting vice president? Nobody knew. Then, in November 1804, Burr made a stunning decision. He returned to Washington to finish his term. For the next 4 months, Aaron Burr, wanted for murder in 2 states, presided over the United States Senate. He sat in the vice president's chair. He called votes. He enforced Senate rules. He even presided over the impeachment trial of Supreme Court Justice Samuel Chase. Senators who wanted him arrested sat in their chamber while he ran the proceedings. It was surreal. Just imagine that today. It was a constitutional crisis, and nobody knew what to do about it. Some senators refused to speak to him. Others acted like nothing had happened. A few even sympathized with him. They believed Hamilton had provoked the duel, and that was just at that point. When Burr's term finally ended on March 2nd, 1805, he gave a farewell speech to the Senate. He talked about the Senate's importance as an institution, about the rule of law, about public service. Many senators actually wept, not because they liked him, but because the whole situation was tragic and absurd. The vice president who'd killed a founding father walked out of the capital a free man. The murder charges were actually still active, but no one ever prosecuted. And Burr's political career was over. And now we're in spring of 1805. Aaron Burr headed west. He traveled down the Ohio River. He met with wealthy landowners. He recruited volunteers. He bought boats and supplies. What was he planning? To this day, historians aren't sure. Some evidence suggests he planned to invade Spanish-controlled Mexico and Texas to conquer territory and set up perhaps his own nation. Others believe he wanted to split the Western territories from the United States. He met with General James Wilkinson, the military governor of Louisiana Territory. Wilkinson seemed interested, but in 1806, Wilkinson, he betrayed him. He sent a letter to Jefferson claiming Burr was organizing a military expedition to break up the Union. Jefferson issued an arrest warrant. Burr was captured in Mississippi Territory in February of 1807 and put on trial not for murder, but for treason. The trial became a national spectacle. Chief Justice John Marshall presided. The prosecution presented letters, witness testimony, circumstantial evidence, but they couldn't prove treason. The Constitution requires 2 witnesses to an overt act of treason. The prosecution couldn't produce them. Burr, he was acquitted, but his reputation was completely destroyed. He was now the vice president who had killed Hamilton and the traitor who tried to break up the United States. Burr, he had enough of the United States. He fled to Europe. 4 years in exile, trying to convince Napoleon, no less, and the British to fund military expeditions, but nobody would help him. In 1812, he finally returned to New York. He practiced law quietly for the next 24 years in New York, and Aaron Burr then died on September 14th, 1836. He was 80 years old. Few people attended his funeral. History, so it seems, has not been kind to Aaron Burr. He's remembered as the man who killed Alexander Hamilton, the vice president who committed murder and basically got away with it because nobody knew what to do. Alexander Hamilton, on the other hand, became something close to a secular saint. His face ended up on the $10 bill, after all. His economic policies shaped America for centuries. A Broadway musical that I talked about, that turned him into a cultural icon. But here's what's interesting. Historians who study Burr closely, and in my research, they argue he was much more complicated than history remembers. He was actually one of the first politicians to actively court the votes of women and free Black New Yorkers. He opposed slavery staunchly. He believed in public education. But none of that mattered after July 11th, 1804, with the duel with Hamilton. One duel, one bullet, 2 lives were completely destroyed, and a constitutional crisis was created. America solved this basically by doing nothing. Hamilton, he became a martyr in a sense. Burr became a cautionary tale about ambition, honor, and revenge. And America learned that sometimes the Constitution actually doesn't have all the answers. So that's our episode for today. I hope you enjoyed it, and it gives you some insight into what happened after this duel, because when you listen to the Broadway musical, or like I read the book, there's a lot missing of what actually happened right after Hamilton died. So I hope you enjoyed this. This has been another episode of Archives and Anchovies. I'm your host, James Coulon, and as always, I wish you a great day, a pleasant evening, and a wonderful week ahead.